Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tom Zutaut.
I'm not that used to being up on a stage. 28 years ago, yesterday, Appetite for Destruction was released. I found Guns N' Roses 30 years ago. It took 2 years to develop that band and make that record. It takes an incredible amount of patience. Everybody wants to make a record right away and they just want to jump out there and do it. And if you want to make music history, you have to get it right. You know, making a great record and putting on a great show, it's like being an Olympic athlete in training. And I think it's interesting that, 28 years ago that record came out. Most of you that were buying music back then probably didn't hear about the band until 27 years ago, because nobody really heard about that band until about a year after the record came out. In fact, if any of you have seen Up Rocks, I recently did a 6-minute clip for them about what was nearly the end of Guns N' Roses, where the company wanted to walk away from the band. And basically, I went and told the president of the company that I thought he was wrong and that the record hadn't even really started yet. And I went up to the owner of the company's office back when real people owned record companies and decided to spend money on developing talent. And I said, this record hasn't even started yet. And he said to me, well, what's the one thing that I could do? Sort of like 10 minutes to talk here. What's the one thing I could do that would make a difference? And I said, well, we have the most visual band in rock music, but MTV won't play their videos. So he made a phone call, and they agreed to play it one time at 4 in the morning. Wasn't looking too good, really. So the band decided to throw a party. We had a big Swan Song party, and we watched it play at 1 a.m. in LA because there weren't East and West Coast feeds for MTV yet. And we stayed up till about 7 or 8 a.m. and we thought it was all over. And little did I know, when my office managed to wake me up at about 5 p.m. that the switchboard at MTV had literally caught on fire from so many phone calls back before there was digital exchanges. It was all wires and stuff and electrical impulses. And so they added the video, and the record sold 1 million in a month. So, it was a dream, I saw Axl Rose actually play for another band. He guested for a song because he traded slots. He was supposed to headline with Guns N' Roses, and he gave his opening band the headline slot, so I missed it. The way I found it, there are these moments in life where you just get an impulse or an instinct, and you have to follow it through. I was driving on Sunset, and I found a poster was up on a telephone pole, and it was that logo of the Guns N' Roses, And I saw that. It caught my attention. I parked my Jeep. I ripped it down. Probably helped them sell a few less tickets. And I just said, I have to go see this band. As far as I'll tell you, another thing, and David from 30 Tigers brought this up, and, there's always this battle between art and commerce in music. And I think right now, one of the reasons that music is getting boring is because all the big companies are focused on commerce rather than art. And I think it's great that a guy like David is focused on art. The greatest music is like the perfect intersection of art and commerce. And it might even lean more towards art, and it brings commerce its way. And, when you sit with a real artist, and, Axl Rose has become, a debilitated person who doesn't really get out much and do what he used to do for whatever the reasons are. But when I first met the band and they came to my house and we just listened to records and talked, and, CNN had just gone on the air. And this is where a guy like Axl's a real artist, and he's smart, and, he said, I read this book by Marshall McLuhan, The Global Village, and he said, CNN is going to ruin the world. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, You know, I could show it to you in art, and that art is behind me. He said, you know, the robot is CNN, the girl is the people getting raped by the cameras and the robot, and the monster is the train wreck that's looming after CNN puts cameras in everybody's face. I didn't necessarily know what he was talking about, but I went out and got the book and tried to read it, and it actually makes a lot of sense to me because that's what's happening every day in the media in our lives. So I think, you know, artists, you know, what they contribute to our culture, you know, it makes us think. And here's something that happened, you know, 29 years ago because he found that piece of art a year before we put the record out. Amazingly, it got banned, so they're really rare. If you see one, buy it immediately. But these are the great people that come along and show us through great music. And, you know, it's no surprise to me that that record shows up in the top 100 of all the lists that come out. So I thought I'd start with some Guns N' Roses. My career actually started with these crazy guys. And, you know, Scott Hendricks said earlier, you know, if you want to work in the music business, you know, you can't just get an A&R job. And, you know, that's really true. And the guy that he replaced at Capitol, Jimmy Bowen, I met by selling 45s for WIA, and Jimmy Bowen used to call me, even though he ran the Nashville division of Elektra, he used to call me and want to know what singles were selling from his roster. And, you know, he gave me a lot of advice and mentored me on how to do what I really wanted to do, which was A&R, and he helped get me a job in LA at Elektra headquarters. And, you know, you have to be willing to start somewhere. I mean, I started delivering newspapers and spending every penny on buying records and listening to new artists and trying to think of, you know, which ones will people like, which ones mean something. And I got pretty good at it, but I was buying finished records. So when I got out to LA, I really wanted to go into the clubs and, you know, find artists that were like rough diamonds that were still playing in their basements or their clubs. And so I was doing a national sales job, and, you know, I started finding things and submitting them to the A&R department. Believe it or not, back then, you know, I couldn't like walk across the street to the A&R department. I had to send a letter like everybody else. One day, you know, this kid came into my office, and I was a kid. I was 19. He was 19 or 18. And he said, "Why don't you come hang out with me?" And I said, "Well, I got a lunch hour." And so he ended up being the chairman of Elektra Sun. He asked me what I thought of the music on the company, and I literally said, "It just sucks. It's terrible. I can hardly sell it." And he went to his dad and told his dad that. His dad called me up into his office and said, "Okay, wise guy, do you think my music sucks?" And I said, "Basically, nobody wants to buy it. I have to give it away." And he said, "The next thing you see that you think people will buy, bring it to me and we'll make sure it gets signed." And it just happened to be Motley Crue because once again I was driving down Sunset Boulevard and I saw a sign on the whiskey that said Motley Crue sold out. So I signed the band. The day I signed the band, we made these crazy photographs. So that was the first band I signed. You know, you never forget about your first band. I read a lot of books about the music business, Star Making Machinery by Jeffrey Stokes, Making Tracks by Charlie Gillette, Clive Davis's first book, which was called Inside the Music Business, not the new book that came out within the last few years.